Very high in iron, very high in zinc, much faster acting. And this is where you're really trying to green things up in a hurry. This is probably the better product to use. If you want to buy it in big quantities, we do get it in 40-pound bags as well as these little bags. And when you look at it, it seems pretty expensive. I don't remember what a 40-pound bag is. It might be 50 bucks or something like that. And you look at the weights and you say, well, gee, that's not that much of a savings. But if you look at the bigger bag of it, you'll find that everything is twice as concentrated. Let me see where the analysis is on here. Let's see here. Copper is 1%, iron's 5%, manganese is 1/2%. If you look at the bigger bag, copper would be 2%, iron 10%, and manganese 1%. So what you're getting in the bigger bag is twice as concentrated as this is.
What is that one called?
This one's called Medina Micronutrients, and it's made from a natural clay that comes out of Mexico. Now I want to talk for just a minute about compost and what compost does. Because we talk about adding a layer of compost to the yard and tell you it does lots of good things. We talk about compost in the vegetable garden. I'm not going to get into that today. You have to come to the vegetable seminar if you want a long talk about why my tomato plants get this tall. But compost does quite a number of different good things when you put it on the grass or when you put it as a mulch in the flower beds and things. Number one, compost is full of microbial life. All kinds of good bacteria, all kinds of beneficial fungi, and a lot of actually larger organisms, protozoans, as well as microarthropods, even beneficial nematodes, things like that. So compost brings a lot of life to the soil. Compost, as it breaks down, produces different kinds of humic acids. People talk about humic acids. I used to think that humic acid, I could go draw a formula for humic acid on the blackboard. And I had been talking to Dr. Elaine Ingham at one of the seminars at hers that we went to. She made the comment when somebody made a question about that, and she said that there are over 100,000 different humic acids. Humic acid is not one thing. Humic acids are organic acids, and there are a tremendous number of different humic acids. So lots of different kinds of humic acids that you're getting out of your compost and things when you put it on the yard. But if you really want to know, and who knows, I mean, it's nice to have a rainy day to talk about this, but as you probably know, we're in a fairly severe drought right now. We haven't had a decent rain in months. And if we get into a very dry summer, you're going to want to try to reduce your watering every way you can, because number one, soils may not let you water the way you want to, and number two, it's going to be very expensive to do so. Compost actually does a real interesting thing as far as reducing the water use in your plants. And I'm going to take 2 minutes to tell you about that, just because I think it's interesting. I don't have a plant in here to demonstrate, but if you could look at the backside of most plants, on the backside of the leaves, there are lots and lots and lots of little tiny openings that we call stomata. Singular is one stomate, plural stomata. These are little pores, if you will, that open and close and open and close. And they open for a couple of purposes. They open primarily to take in carbon dioxide. Because remember, they're taking carbon out of the air, they're bonding it together, adding energy to these bonds, and they're building carbohydrates and things. So those pores are opening up primarily for the purpose of taking carbon dioxide in. While they're open, of course good things are happening like oxygen going out, but while they're open, there's also a lot of water vapor that is flowing out through those little openings in the leaves. So if we want to cut down on the amount of water a plant uses, the amount of water that a plant loses through those stomata, the individual stomate, it would be nice if we could make those things shut down earlier in the day, right? So what we do is super treat that plant with carbon dioxide. So instead of having to stay open 4 hours to take up its daily supply of carbon dioxide, what would happen if it could get all the carbon dioxide it needs in the first 30 minutes? Would really reduce the water consumption of that plant, because we're not losing nearly as much back to the atmosphere. When we put good compost on the yard, we're creating a super concentration of carbon dioxide right down there at ground level. The stomata are not staying open nearly as long. The plants are not using as much water. A lot of people who put layers of compost on their yard, thin layers, find they reduce their watering by 50 to 70%. So that's another good thing that compost does. Disadvantages to putting compost over the yard. It's laborious. Let me tell you what, you get a truckload of compost, it takes a lot of energy to get out there and spread it. We're not talking carbon, well, we are talking carbon energy, but it takes a long time to do it. If you want to pay the money, you can get a company like ABC that comes out and blows the compost out over the yard. They're using a $150,000 truck to do that. So you're going to pay a pretty good price to get somebody to do it, but at least it's going to get done. But putting compost on the yard is an excellent, excellent thing to do. Putting compost in the flower beds and all, great idea. Golf courses do it about 8 times a year. That's how those greens stay so good looking. And they're really having to work to counteract the effect of all the blasted chemicals they're using. They're putting out less than 1/8 of an inch at a time. For those of us that are putting it on the yard ourselves, between 1/4 of an inch and 1/2 an inch is ideal. How often should you do it? As often as you can. Certainly no more than twice a year. Most of us can't afford to do that. If you did it once every year, you'd be getting a lot of benefit to it. Yes, sir?
Would you qualify peat moss compost?
No. Oh, just a second. Peat moss, years ago, we thought that was a great organic soil amendment. Today, to me, peat moss has no purpose whatsoever in the landscape or in any use for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's not really a renewable resource. It's like calling oil a renewable resource. It's not. Yeah, it's being produced all the time, but we're using it up 100 times faster than it's growing in nature. Secondly, peat moss is a real interesting thing, and I don't think anybody can really explain it at this point, but peat moss is antimicrobial. Peat moss is a natural destroyer of the things in life that decompose things. I had the pleasure a few years ago of going to Ireland, where they have the big peat bogs. Saw a head from a, virtually perfectly preserved red stag. This huge deer that used to be in Ireland, hadn't been there for 5,000 years. But it falls into the peat bog and it's naturally mummified and preserved because the peat somehow stops microbial activity. We looked at a chunk of butter they figured was 150 years old. They bury stuff in the peat bogs. That's their natural refrigerator. But the point is, peat moss kills off a lot of the life that we really now know is very important in the soil. In the days when we were all using chemical fertilizers and things and we were killing all that life off anyway, we didn't realize that peat moss was only compounding the problem. Now that we're recognizing, how many good things microbial life does, we don't want to use peat either.
I had used peat moss.
I did too.
I had read that it's good to stop
brown patch.
Brown patch.
That's guess who funded that? Guess who funded that research?
A&M.
No, the Canadian. The research was done by A&M, but it was funded by the Canadian peat moss industry. It's as stupid as all these things. We're letting the drug companies pay the money to do all their own drug trials. And if somebody gives you $500,000 to do a test, do you think you're going to be a little partial to hoping that you find what they want to find?
What's an alternative for brown patch?
Cornmeal works extremely well. Garlic works extremely well. If you're not using chemical fertilizers, you probably won't have it to begin with. Yes?
Where do you recommend getting it?
Compost. If you're going to buy it in a bag, Ladybug is the best compost out there. If you're going to buy it by the truckload, I think that earth, soils, and compost makes the best compost out there. And there are several different reasons for that. Again, talking about microbial life. If you take a tablespoon of soil, of good, healthy soil, you can have as many as 10,000 different kinds of bacteria, and maybe millions or billions of each. You can have as many as 5,000 different kinds of beneficial fungi. Now, the bacteria that break down oak leaves is a little bit different from the bacteria that breaks down molasses,